understanding what the Fermi paradox is actually about. If we come back to its origins, Fermi simply asked, "Where is everybody?" When stated in isolation and in a modern context, I think it's easy to misinterpret Fermi's original question as regarding what is often called the eerie silence. The fact that after decades of searching, we haven't detected any extrasolar artificial radio transmissions. Now, I think when people hear the phrase Fermi paradox, this is actually what they often have in mind. After all, that has been our primary scientific effort to detect alien life over the past 5 or 6 decades, and indeed there's been no Jodie Foster moment of a slam dunk detection. But of course, in 1950, there had been hardly any serious radio searches yet either, because remember, this is 10 years prior to Frank Drake's famous Project Ozma experiment, which really dawned the modern radio search era. When we put Fermi's quote back into its context of that New York cartoon, it becomes clear that Fermi's question was concerning visitation. Despite this, discussions of his eponymous paradox often miss this nuance, and the term has sort of evolved into a catch-all phrase for any and all null evidence for aliens. Now, at this point, this distinction might seem a little trivial, almost academic, but as we'll see, it has some important ramifications down the road. Another contentious point is the name itself. The phrase Fermi paradox first appeared in print in 1977 in an article by physicist David Stevenson, and evidently it was pretty catchy. It's now one of the most frequently Googled topics in all of science. Of course, Fermi was almost certainly not the first person to wonder this question. For example, Soviet rocket scientist Tsiolkovsky published similar thoughts in 1933. Yet more, over the years, many have argued about whether it should really be called a paradox at all. Maybe it's best to call it a problem or simply a question, 3 terms which are of course not mutually exclusive. Paradox here means logical contradiction, but as many have pointed out, the contradiction only exists if one accepts certain assumptions. So, for example, in Fermi's original framing of the problem, the assumption that falls into contradiction is that which was depicted in the New Yorker magazine, i.e. visiting aliens. If one rejects that assumption though, as indeed Fermi concluded was most likely, then there is no contradiction. Aliens don't visit us because they lack the ability or the will to do so. So does this mean then that it's a misnomer to call this a paradox? You know, honestly, part of me doesn't really care about this that much. I mean, this is semantics at this point. It's kind of similar to how I feel about the classification of Pluto. But I know that many do care, so perhaps it is best to think of this as a conditional paradox, a logical contradiction